Going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Celeste Armas. I'm CEO and co-founder of RiskRater. And we're happy to have all of you here this morning. We have two very wonderful speakers, Ana Maria de Alba, who will be moderating the program today, and Willie Rondon from the IRS, and Ana Maria will introduce him a little bit more. Before we start the program, I thought I'd take just a couple of minutes and talk to you a little bit about RiskRater for those of you that are not familiar with RiskRater. RiskRater performs the annual AML, CFT, and sanctions risk assessment. And as all of you probably are aware, FinCEN in June of this year moved from, we want you to have, you should have the annual risk assessment, to now it's a regulatory requirement. And this is very important because we know that doing the AML CFT risk assessment is a difficult task. As Ana Maria will speak, she is the CEO of CSMB International, consulting firm that focuses on regulatory compliance. And we've been doing risk assessments with Excel, building macros, and struggling, as you all do when you do, if you use Excel. And we looked for a solution in the marketplace, couldn't find one. And decided to build one. And, fundamentally, the issue is this. We know, because we've done the work ourselves, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of costs. It's a very complex process, especially if you want to do it correctly. And if you're using Excel, it's prone to errors. And anytime you have human intervention in a process, that can happen. And at the end of the day, we would hand our clients, a 120-page or 200-page report, which is fantastic. You show it to your regulator, but is it really a way for you to manage strategically your risk? No, because it's a static tool. So we focused on coming up with a tool that really met all of our requirements, and also we knew met regulator requirements. We now have a solution which is going to cut your time in half. It is the most accurate methodology. It calculates inherent risk based on all of the inflow and outflow of transactions that go through the institution during that covered period. And so the inherent risk score is calculated based on the volume and value of all of your transactions. And let's face it, if the inherent risk score is not solid, it's like building a house with a weak foundation. Everything else flows after that inherent risk score. And it is extremely difficult to do this using any kind of manual approach, as we know well. And at the end of the day, we're leaving you not with just a static tool, but here you have a solution that you can access during the year. You can run your risk assessment on an as-needed basis. Generally, most institutions are running it once a year. Some are starting to run it quarterly, which we think is great.
Excellent. Yeah. If we can just move on to quickly.
Yeah, and just to give you an idea, we're in 8 different countries, institutions of all sizes. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ana Maria.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry to cut you, but I know that I've seen Willie's presentation, and I want to have as much time as possible for that. But thank you so much, Celeste, for giving us the introduction. And I want to introduce today our special guest, Willie Rondon. Willie, a lot of you may know him already. You may know him from seeing him in a lot of the FIBA courses and the conferences, and just about a lot of presentations that he's done globally. He's a seasoned financial crimes investigator, especially specializes a lot in crypto, tax. He's also a tax expert, and he's an enrolled agent with 22 years in IRS criminal investigations experience. He focuses on forensic accounting and representing taxpayers in IRS examinations, collections, and appeals. And he brings in with him very strong expertise in digital asset taxation. That's pretty spiffy, I should say. I didn't even know what a digital asset taxation was until I met Willie. Willie's the founder also of and also the managing member of Willigent. Left the IRS earlier this year or at the end of last year, and he opened up his own firm. He's been collaborating with both with CSMB and with RiskRater a great deal, especially in 2024, and we expect that he's going to do a lot more with us as the year goes before the year ends, and by 2025, especially with RiskRadar mostly. His focuses is in offering services in cryptocurrency taxation, as I said earlier, forensic accounting, and AML compliance. I also want to he's served. I wanted to say that he has served as special agent in charge and supervisory special agent overseeing field investigations in South Florida, which you know are really juicy, in Puerto Rico and in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Today's presentations are going to focus, as many of you attended the last, I'm sorry, the last webinar that we had back in September. And so the focus of our webinars were basically what Celeste said, the FinCEN fact sheet in the proposed rule making. And we focused ours in two sections. One was the risk assessment process, which I covered back in October. And the one that we're going to cover today, we're focusing on the AML CFT National Priorities. And that's what Willie is going to talk about today. He's going to concentrate on cybercrime, including relevant cybersecurity and virtual currency considerations, which are going to be important for a lot of you. Not that you are, as a bank, maybe issuing these cryptocurrencies, but what to do, what to look for when your clients are transacting, and the fiat that is in the backup of those transactions, those crypto transactions, is flowing through your organization. He's also going to talk about fraud, since proceeds from fraudulent activities may be laundered through accounts controlled by cyber actors and money mules. And the last topic he's going to address is going to be the transnational criminal organization activity. With that, I'm going to pass it on right over to Willie. And Willie has a great presentation for you guys today, which we will be able to share. And remember that this presentation is also it is recorded, and we will be able to share the recording with you as well. Thank you, and go ahead, Willie. The floor is all yours.
Well, thank you, Ana Maria. I'm actually here trying to work out my presentation. Can you guys see it on the screen? All right. So thank you very much, Anna, and thank you for that introduction. And it sounds like a lot of titles, and I'm just glad I passed that page of 22 years working for the government, which it really enriched to the maximum, I think, my expertise in financial crimes. As you know, in IRS, we specialize in tax, and then also specialize in money laundering schemes, and also Pan Secrecy Act violations, such as those committed by money service businesses and banks and stuff like that. So it's been really a great experience moving into the private side of things, right? And more importantly, having now the opportunity to work with great professionals like you, Ana Maria, Celeste, and others, particularly members of FIBA and other organizations. So it's been fantastic. So the reason I'm here today, Ana, thank you for the invitation, and I really want to present to everyone here my perspective, right, coming from the government after working 22 years and sitting behind the scenes, right, in reviewing all the suspicious activity reports, CTRs, 8300s, and all those forms that financial institution has to file with the government, right? And here we are sitting now with a proposed national priorities, right, that were published by FinCEN. So my goal here is pretty much answer this question, right, for the financial institutions. Is your organization ready, and it's on the way to be ready when it comes down to one or three of the national priorities that has to do with primarily cybercrime, fraud, and then the TCO, the transnational crime organizations. On my last position in IRS, I had the opportunity to work as one of the two international operations director overseeing the overseas office. Some of the offices that are overseas were the operations in Latin America and in high-risk countries for transnational crime organizations such as Mexico, Colombia, and other areas in Latin America. I also oversees the operations in Hong Kong. And with that comes a lot of investigations, right? Luckily, I was in a position, I was not doing the investigation at that stage, but I was actually in charge of ensuring that our partnership with international partners was one that it would allow us to bring the evidence in the US to exchange that. A lot of that evidence, Anna, I had to tell you, it really came from, understanding the financial system, right? And working with partners from the financial system and those that offer those type of information through the filing of the suspicious activity report. So here today, I'm going to focus on understanding in providing pretty much the participants an overview of what the cybercrime fraud is related to. And I'm going to provide some examples, including an example that I recently received from a friend regarding the ransomware and how that is impacting our communities and what is it that financial institutions need to look for. I also, towards the end, going to cover the issues that we're having with international organizations involving fentanyl. As we all know, that's a huge problem that we have in our society right now. And the banks and the financial institutions, the MSBs, the convertible virtual currency exchanges, and all those institutions are really our first defense, right? And as a former investigator, I could tell you that a lot of our cases were initiated from information the financial institution filed. Unfortunately, it's all private, it's all grand jury information, it's not shared to the detail with the financial institutions. But those organizations and banks that actually work with me, and they know because you work with the compliance officers a lot of time on getting the information. That's actually what we're seeing in terms of the fentanyl globally and nationwide. More than anything, it's really a lot of information being reported by the banks, and a lot of time the banks doesn't know that the transactions are actually directly connected to fentanyl, because obviously you're not going to have a drug dealer walking into a bank and say, "Hey, here's $9,000," and that comes straight from fentanyl, right? So the banks have to prepare themselves and adapt themselves, get the training corresponding, have the technology in place to be able to identify all that. So let's start with the
Willie, I'm
cybercrime.
just going to cut in for just one little second because I've been reminded. Para los que están oyendo, está todo, lo estamos traduciendo en español, así que si tienen cualquier duda me pueden pasar un chat si no lo encuentran. Sorry, Willie, I just wanted to mention that.
No, that's okay. Thank you very much. And I was joking with the translator before I start, if she was going to translate me from English to Spanish, Spanish to English, because as a good Puerto Rican, sometimes I speak Spanglish, right? So now, so let's get to the cybercrime, and the first thing I have here is pretty much define really what some of these the key definitions of, for example, the cybercrime is, we all know, it involved the misuse of accounts for illicit gain, like, for example, ransomware payments or hacking proceeds, right? When someone get hacked, they ask for a ransom, and then that ransom is paid a certain way, right? We're going to cover some of those payments. We're going to cover some of the red flags. We're going to cover some of the guidance out there that is offered so we could all prepare a little better with regards to these. In terms of ransomware, is pretty much the type of malicious software, what's formerly known as malware, that locks access to the system or the data and offers often it encrypts the users, right? So it's the business owner, the hospitals, the police department, anyone that is being a victim pretty much gets locked out, right? You get an email, say your computer is being locked down. We got your information. You need to pay this much money. A lot of time, the ransom comes into play because there's some certain risk for reputation on some of the businesses, right? A lot of businesses, for example, hospital, doctor, officers, they don't want to come out and say that they were part of a hack, right? And they pay the ransom, unfortunately, but right, they don't go to the authorities. They act on their own, and that pretty much results in really some some ransom to be paid. The bottom line is that pretty much victims are extorted and ransom payments are paid in order to regain access. And a lot of these crimes are being paid, or the perpetrators are asking for the payments to be paid in convertible virtual currencies, as we know, more friendly, say crypto, right? It plays a significant role, including the user of mixers to make it even more complicated for the law enforcement or the investigators trying to trace the funds. It really helps the criminals facilitate the crimes, and because it really anonymizes the transactions. So anytime you see some sort of connection between a mixer and your institution, you could think that there's potential for a crime to be happening somehow, and you should do some additional due diligence when it comes to that, because most likely there could be a criminal behind it. In terms of the ransomware attacks, uh, the results of the ransomware is really a loss of critical information and the business functionality, and it really disrupt operations. Uh, the targeted sectors include governments, financial entities, educational entities, healthcare institutions, with smaller municipalities and healthcare organizations. These are the ones that have been highlighted as the most affected by this ransomware. As a matter of fact, when I was a supervisor here in Miami, I actually took a complaint from a municipality that had been affected, right, for ransomware, and I was able to quickly contact the FBI, the experts on the ransomware, and they were able to help them and continue the investigations towards that. So I don't think no one is excluded of these. The key to be protected is to have good security measures. Make sure that your employees are properly trained. Make sure you don't open links that you don't know. I remember one time here in my house where my daughter pretty much called me to her room and said, "Dad, what's happening here?" And it was pretty much she has clicked on a link, and someone was pretty much taking over her computer. Luckily, she called me right away. I was able to shut down everything. There was no loss. But if she would have called me probably another hour after, it would have resulted in probably potential damage of information. Here, I want to now present a ransomware email. This is actually a true email. I did not change anything on this email other than the from and to address, so you guys don't know who we're talking about here. But this actually happened last week, as you can see from the date, and I want to point out to you the time. It's a ransomware type of email where pretty much the perpetrator start notifying the victim, pretty much saying hello, trying to be nice, and pretty much specifying. As you can see, the email was sent from your email account. So pretty much the from and the to is going to have the same email address. And pretty much the person is telling the victim that means that your account has been hacked, right? We got access to all your account. We stole all your data, and you have 7 days to transfer $9,500, but in Bitcoin, to this address. That's the actual address. I'm actually publishing that address because I do want everybody to know that's a Bitcoin address that is being used for ransomware. So if you work for a crypto trading company, use that address and tag your system because it's related to that. I look into that address and there's been no activity whatsoever. So if you go into that address, you may find the address to be empty, no transactions, but that's typically how they operate. And then it tells the victim, once the money is received, we will inform you about the security hole. So we will advise you what you need to do to correct it, and we'll remove all the stolen data. Yeah, right, right. And it pretty much threat the person, if you don't transfer the money, then we're gonna leak all your data. This is actually the typical ransomware email that you see out there. And it typically starts just as you described there. It starts with a threat. We stole your data, pay me, and it provides cryptocurrency addresses, right? Like in this case, Bitcoin. And it actually ends the the communication with another threat. If you don't pay me, we're going to leak all the information, and everybody's going to know that your information is being put out there. What's this going to result? If the person is one that doesn't have knowledge of technology, doesn't have the right people behind them, they're going to get real worried about their reputation. They're going to get real worried about their client's information. Think about, for example, if you're a doctor or an attorney, right? Or someone that has a consulting firm and has a lot of clients with very sensitive information, you probably will freak out, right? And pay the ransom. But unfortunately, it has been proven that some of these ransom payments, some of them could easily ended up in the hands of terrorists, right? So we got to be very careful. We got to make sure not only our institutions are protected, but we also looking for these indicators with our customers. And I'm going to cover some of the actions when you have customers that are paying ransom that you could probably identify through the transactions. The ransomware payments, it pretty much work like this. First, there's a perpetrator, as I explained in on my previous slide, that may threaten to publish sensitive files from the victims. Those including individuals, or it could include businesses, as I said before. A ransomware victim will typically transmit the funds to the perpetrators first, moving the funds from their current bank account via wire transfers, via ACH, or via credit card payments to most of the time, like in this example that I told you, it was the payment was as in crypto, so the person would have wire transfer or ACH funds from their account to a CBC, a crypto exchange, such as Coinbase, Binance, Kraken, and pretty much you will see on a customer account that probably will never have a transaction with an exchanger. All of a sudden, you see a $10,000 wire transfer there, right? Why? Because the person is moving the fiat, right, the US dollars into crypto, right? The next step, which is step number 3, it's when the person pretty much converts the fiat money, the US dollar, it converts it into crypto, and this typically happens at a Coinbase, Kraken, a crypto exchanger, right? The cyber criminals, as I mentioned before, most commonly require the payments in Bitcoin. Why? Because I really don't know why they use Bitcoin more than any other coin, but it's typically because I will assume, and my theory behind it is because for more people out there that don't know about crypto, Bitcoin is the most popular. So when a person that is a perpetrator tells a victim, "Pay me in Bitcoin," eh, I guess the victim will quickly understand what they mean crypto, and they will probably associate the payment through that means. The step number 4 is when the victim uh, pretty much transmit the cryptocurrency and send it to a designated address by the perpetrator. Like in the example I told you before, you can see here, they're asking to send information to that BTC account, the Bitcoin account, right? So that's where the tracing is going to begin. So you're going to see, as an investigator, you're going to see a transaction converting fiat to crypto, sending a wire transfer to an exchanger like Coinbase, Kraken, Binance, and then from there, sending from Kraken, Binance, or Coinbase, or any others, sending it to where? To at the BTC address that we see here. That's where everything starts. But it really doesn't end there, because now comes the fun part, right? Those that have taken anti-money laundering certifications with Anna and Julio and others know that the laundering of the funds is the fun part, right? That's the part that the criminals are gonna confuse us investigators. They're gonna confuse everybody, and they're gonna take any type of measure possible to disguise or disconnect the crime from the proceeds, right? So they could clean the money, right? This is the part pretty much that they use various means. What's the first thing that they use in crypto? They use these mixers. They use these tumblers. They use chain hopping. They use all these techniques that are known to be used by criminals in crypto to do what? Disguise the transaction. So typically in a wire transfer, when someone is trying to launder money, they typically send the money to an offshore account and send it from one country to another account. Same things happen in crypto. And money goes from a legitimate registered exchanger, right, such as Coinbase, Binance, Kraken, and all those. And then from there, they put it in crypto and they start mixing it. They start changing it from Bitcoin to Ethereum, from Ethereum to Monero. From Monero, they put it in a mixer. From a mixer, and you know what happens in the mixer is pretty much it's like a tumbler, right? It comes in and from one address, and it comes in on Thursday at 7 a.m. When it comes out, you could time it so it comes out 3 hours, 4 hours later. And when it comes out of that tumbler, it's very hard to trace it, right? So it disguises completely the connection of point A to point B. So for investigators, it's pretty hard, but believe me, there are investigators out there that can put it together in law enforcement, and I've been very impressed in some of the training that I've taken with some of these investigators, how they could do actually the peel shade to connect them. Because there's another thing that happens where you could probably put $20,000 in, but when you get it out, not only you're switching in the mixes times, but you also could switch amounts. So instead of getting $10,000 out, you get it in pieces, right? It's called peel chain. You get it out in pieces of $3 or whatever, right? It's part of the service that mixing service are offering. So there's a lot of discussion that some of these could be legitimate, but I don't see no reason why you have to pay a service to these guys in transaction if it's not because you're trying to hide something, right? I always say if you don't have to hide anything, don't pay a fee, right? So a lot of these criminals pay significant amount of fee, but the whole purpose is because they're trying to disconnect the crime from the proceeds. So when they get it out, they could be clean money, at least not be able to be traceable to the funds. And then the last part, it's actually very important as well, is when you cash it out, typically they use typical schemes. They do smurfing, right? So it doesn't trigger a CTR, and the banks or the financial institutions or the exchangers don't have to follow CTR. So they use the typical technique of smurfing. They also convert it into fiat at countries that are known to have very minimal anti-money laundering controls, and particularly that are very lacking of controls when it's related to cyber crimes. Next part here is I have two cases to point out to you. Ana Maria this morning sent me a link to a third case that was recently announced. It has to do with South Korea. The point here with these two cases is DOJ is really looking at the cyber criminals. Not only DOJ, but as you can see from the priorities that were published by FinCEN, they're also looking at the cyber criminals at Treasury from a perspective not only of trying to help the victims, right, that are victims of these crimes, but also to find the criminals behind it. DOJ has been very successful on working with FBI and other agencies. And I apologize, but my presentation has some sort of timing that is switching the slides. So if you see me backing forward, that's the issue. So these two cases are pretty significant to me, and I want to highlight it. But most of the cyber crimes, ransomware type of cases are very similar in the perspective of there's typically a foreign perpetrator, right? There's typically someone in a foreign country that is actually behind it, right? In these two cases right here, that's actually what happened. There was some sort of ransomware issue, and a lot of people were victims. So the typical case will have a foreign perpetrator. It's going to have U.S. victims. In the first case, Black Hat, it was about 1,000 victims, and FBI actually issued a free decryption tool. What's a decryption tool is that's the way to free up the devices, right, or use system. Instead of paying a ransom, FBI figured it out. This is how you could decrypt the issue and get your system back in place. And then the other case is called Lockbit, and that's a case very similar as well. And the individuals pled guilty, and it was the same type of scheme that we discussed before. Again, to foreign nationals that pled guilty, and again, there were attacks against based in the U.S. and worldwide, not just in the U.S. I mean, anywhere they could make money with this. The next slide, it's we're going to speak here about fraud. With this one has to do with the proceeds from fraudulent activities. And the first part I want to cover over here is pretty much the three type of fraud. The activities that are out there, ID theft is the first one. And as you guys here from South Florida remember back probably 6, 7 years ago, I was supervisor of a group actually partnered with the local authorities here in Miami investigating ID theft because all the millions of dollars that criminals were filing on false tax returns, right? That was ID theft at the time. Now, typically, the cyber crimes are continue to use ID theft, which is pretty much, it involves taking someone else personal information to commit a fraud. I saw cases where people were stealing ID information from hospitals, from medical offices, from schools, right? So, I mean, little by little, I think we have changed in our business operations where we now have controls, we now have policies in our companies, and we now are looking more as companies to protect the information of our customer. But back 8 years ago, it was not as controlled, so the criminals were taking advantage of it, and they were using that information and using it to sell it out there in the dark web and others, and committing fraud such as filing fraudulent tax returns. When it comes down to ID theft and the use of cyber criminals, it's very important to understand the second one, which is the phishing and the social engineer, right? This is like I showed you before. Pretty much it involved sensitive information. It involved an employee of a company getting an email and clicking on the link. It involved someone looking over your information and taking over your password and getting access to your system. It involved really even the person just leaving a computer desk open at a Starbucks, right? And someone else coming in and taking your information. So the phishing and the social engineer scheme, it's really the only way to prevent it is by educating employees and our customers about this threat and implementing a strict verification procedures, like the second ID or the second password verification, the text message that we get in our system. I don't know why, but I still see people with their computer being completely unlocked, right? And I still see people traveling overseas and not connecting to services like VPNs, right? And stuff like that. Very, very dangerous for these type of purposes. And then the third one that I want to discuss, it has to do with the mules. And the mules are pretty much individuals who pretty much transfer illegal obtained money on behalf of others, right? It's people that pretty much offer themselves to move money. Sometimes they don't even know what the money is about, right? But they're served as mules, right? And that's what we call it mules because some mules they know what they're doing, some mules they don't know what they're doing. So they've been targeted as money mules. They offer themselves to open bank accounts, to deposit money in their accounts, and unfortunately, when we have cases that we deal with hundreds of mules, right, it becomes very difficult for law enforcement to put them together. You know how we put it together? I could tell you from my experience, when you get 50 SARs filed in the same company and they connect among different jurisdictions. So I seen SARs on the same case being filed by, let's say, Wells Fargo out of California. And then I see the same subject on SARs file in Miami. And then all of a sudden at a different bank, right? Unfortunately, the Wells Fargo compliance office doesn't know that there's a bank in Miami, I don't know, Ocean Bank, filing a SAR on the same subject, but the agent investigators is able to put it together. So that's the value of the SARs, right? And these days, with artificial intelligence, the governments are really taking advantage of all these analytical way of reviewing the information. And I always remember someone telling me one day, long time ago, that they review and they read every single SAR. I could tell you here in Miami, that's not doable. We had thousands and thousands of SARs being filed every month, and it's really very difficult to review every single SAR. I do tell you that as an investigator, as a former supervisor, as a former assistant special agent in charge and director, every investigation we touch in CI, in IRSCI, that I supervise at least, but that I worked on, I always search the SAR databases because there was always something to find, right? It was always some type of records out there. There were bank accounts identified, and then I could follow up the trace of the money by simply going into the SAR database and identify what that person was doing illegal. Um, the key red flags that we could find in some of these activity, the first one I want to touch on is the onboarding. With the onboarding, it's important that we look at unusual client information. We got to look for keys or red flags that involve, for example, incomplete, inconsistent, or fabricated information, that being on persons or businesses. And remember always that in these schemes, they use mules, right? The same way they use mules, they use shell companies as well. So always look at it always strike me because of my experience in some cases that I worked, when someone out there coming in just in the country on day one, they set up a company, and then the next day they're catching $10 million. I mean, how is that possible? I mean, I really understand that we could all hit a jackpot and be successful. But if I'm a banker somewhere and I see that type of activity and I know my customer, that will be a huge trigger. Not only because of tax evasion type of crimes, but because of these cyber crimes. That's typically what they do. And in the past, they will deposit $20,000, $30,000 at one spot. Now criminal knows that you guys are going to be looking out for those transactions are reported. So what they use these mules all over the country, and they actually deposit at different places. And particularly, it's very risky for those type of entities that have presence in different states, right? And it's very important to know your customer, know where that transaction is taking place. So I always tell people, not only know your customer, but match it with know your transaction. So once you could put together one and two, it's a matter of making an assessment and then deciding if you're reporting or not. Another of the top findings that red flags that we could put out there, as I mentioned before, is your unusual business model. Like I said before, new established entities or businesses that are registered in jurisdictions that we know are weak for AML. So we have a company in Miami dealing with a company in certain high risk jurisdiction. I don't want to mention anything because I don't want to get any country in the wrong side, but I think we all know what those high risk jurisdictions are that published out there by the organizations, and we need to increase our due diligence when that happens and understand not only the customer but the transactions as well. And then the third one is association, as I say, with high risk country. When it comes down to monitoring transaction, this one is a little more lengthy. This one involves irregular patterns, and this is where the companies really need to invest in technology. This is where tools like risk radar come into place. You know, if you don't know your risk, you don't know what you're looking for on your transactions, right? So understand your risk, and then understanding your risk, set up systems that will actually highlight you those transactions that are going to be suspicious. This is where tools like radar come into place. This is tools where artificial intelligence come into place. This is where you as a company need to invest on analytical tools and software that is going to make your job more effective to be able to identify those type of cases. I think we all seen recent cases publicized on banks where part of the fault was not being able to invest in technology. I think these days the amount of transactions that banks have to review is really not uh, uh, it's not doable unless you really invest in technology. So the second part of these is understanding that um, there are frequent, for example, some of these red flags involve frequent large value transactions that are really inconsistent with the client. I mean, I really think that 20 years ago when I was starting as an investigator, I remember reading SARs where the theme of the SAR was a person conducting transactions that are not consistent with the line of business that they run. Well, Here we are 25 years after, and that's one of the highlights for these cyber criminals because, again, they use the mules, they bring people in from typically from outside of the country. They get their papers over here. The next thing is they're working for criminal, unfortunately, knowing or unknowing that that's happening. Another type of unusual transactions are unexplained or repeated transfers to and from virtual currency exchanges. In all the trainings and speaking events that I attend, I always hear the bank or the financial institution telling me, or even countries I heard when I was working in the government, oh, we don't touch crypto. We don't have anything to do with crypto. But I'm like, hello, don't you have clients that are moving money from Coinbase, from Kraken, from any of these places? Yeah, you're not moving crypto. You're actually receiving a wire on US dollar, but that US dollar is coming from a location that had crypto. So although you're probably not required to trace the crypto transaction, you are required to know your customer. You are more importantly required to again know your transaction, know what your client is doing. Why is this person now all of a sudden coming to my teller and transferring $10,000 to a crypto exchange when the person had no clue or had ever transferred crypto before? Ask the question. Maybe by asking the question, you run into a person that is desperate because their business is being affected on ransomware, and it tells you about it. So when you file that SAR, you're going to have more information to report. Look out there for geographic red flags. Like I said before, typically the criminals are going to be conducting transactions to countries that have very low uh, expectations of compliance on anti-money laundering. Um, the structured transactions, like I mentioned before, smurfing, even in the crypto, they're using smurfing for whatever reason. But that's one of the red flags as it connects to some of the crimes, and not only cyber crimes, but all fraud at all. Unusual payment patterns is another. This is pretty much when the client it's paying invoices of unknown parties uh, where there's not a proven relationship before. So all of a sudden you see a bank account paying a company in China where this individual is typically conducting transactions with an entity in Miami or with an entity in New York. All of a sudden you see a change in the pattern of the payments that should trigger some sort of due diligence for you if the profile in the customer is not matching or there's some other attributes in the customer profile or the transaction that trigger that kind of action. Suspicious use accounts that involve when there's an account that was open in January, it was never used, and then all of a sudden in July you start seeing a bunch of wire transfers going to countries that are known to be high risk on cyber crimes, right? Such as the Middle East, and we all of a sudden um, trigger some alerts because the account was dormant. So look at the transactions. Again, go back to the basics of anti-money laundering. Know your customer, know your transaction, ask the question, investigate, and then report if you have to. And another one that is pretty common is accounts that pretty much exist as a pass-through. I mean, that's a very common. You see money coming in, money going out. The money never stays in the account. And I remember as an investigator seeing this happening a lot. And it happens a lot, not only with cybercrime, but with a lot of crimes, including, trade-based money laundering and others of the priority for the US. Red flags from the client behavior is pretty much two of them. It's they're reluctant and resistant to give you information, and there's a connection to previous flag activity. And the reluctancy, it really could come from perpetrators, but it also could come from victims that they don't want you to know as a financial institution that their business has been exposed on a hack. So it's important to train the employees. It's important to talk to your frontline employees, that person that has a contact with the customer, to be able to identify certain behaviors on the customers that will trigger suspicious activity and you to investigate further. This slide right here, it pretty much shows actionable steps when reporting SARs or STRs in your countries that you require to file STRs. It really includes putting in your SAR, detailed descriptions of the transactions. That includes, please include transaction hatches, and I'm referring to crypto transactions. Whenever if you work in a crypto exchange or a service that provide crypto, I remember seeing a SAR on a gambling related investigation I was investigating where the person was gambling overseas and the money was coming to a U.S. institution. There was a SAR filed in the person. The SAR was filed for gambling overseas, but what was missing? It was missing the wallet. It was missing the transaction hatches. You're going to make the life of an investigator much easier if you put this information in the SAR because it's going to quickly help the investigator trace the information publicly in the blockchain and be able to continue the investigation based on the information you put in the SAR. Use key terms, and I quoted one over here. It's called the CyberFin 2021-004, A004. This one is a term that FinCEN put out there specifically for cyber-related crime. And it's important you put that because, like I said before, the government is investing in artificial intelligence and other automatic tools that it will greatly help the government when an investigator goes in the system and they just type this key term, it immediately will pop up all the cases. So if you're an agent or FBI and you're looking at cybercrime in South Florida, you could literally just put in the system's seek codes and you could just put this key term and you could quickly focus in the latest trends that you're seeing out there. The next one that and very important is, and probably most important for the financial institutions, and I think these days everybody should be doing this, is cross-checking the accounts or the behaviors of the customers with OFAC sanction lists. This particular applies for customers that are transacting or sending money to either wallets that are being designated or countries that are known to be designated by OFAC. It's important to follow these two. The next slides just speak about the recommendations, pretty much to summarize the whole cybercrime part of it. Implement rigorous KYC and enhanced due diligence processes. Leverage your technology with, for example, the technology tools at your organization, for example, with blockchain analytical tools for tracing cryptocurrency. But at the same time, if you're not an exchanger, use technology that is going to help you identify these red flags. Go over the advisories, identify the red flags, make sure you set up countermeasures in your organizations that are going to help you identify these transactions for you to take actions, right? Either review it and put it on hold, review it and moving forward and report it, review it and file a SAR with the organizations and make determinations if that person should continue or not as a customer in your organization. And then the last one, regularly review FinCEN advisories. I could tell you my experience as an investigator, whenever I was doing presentations with the government, this is what I will go. FinCEN does a phenomenal job in identifying trends and putting them together. So particularly, not only for law enforcement to understand it, but also for the financial industry to understand those. And I'm going to cover some of those in the next few slides that they point out some of the particular schemes. If I were you, depending what your role is in the bank, but if your role is one at the high level of the compliance officer, I would really be looking at these advisories. I would be working with my bank in establishing countermeasures to make sure that my bank, my financial institution, whatever that is protected because FinCEN is putting these advisories out there for a reason. A lot of time, and when I was in Mexico, I remember working with FinCEN hand to hand in some of the trends that I was seeing in Mexico, and those resulted in FinCEN pretty much putting out there some of these trends. So now let's go to the transnational crime organization. This is the last part of the presentation, and primarily I want to point out to you, transnational crime organization, or TCOs, like we call them, are pretty much out there everywhere. I think we all know, organizations that are being highlighted, TCOs, existed for years, right? Primarily, they started with narcotic organizations, right? Now they're moving into the cyber crimes, there's healthcare, transnational crime organizations. I mean, there's really all kind of organizations out there these days, particularly the ones that FinCEN put in their advisory has to do with cyber crimes. It has to do with narcotics. It has to do with corruption. It has to do with human trafficking. And one that, as we all know, it's really affected our communities in the United States. It has to do with fentanyl. So I highlighted for you here, what is it, six advisories from FinCEN. And I wanted to point out to you these advisories because they really have good information. The first one that I highlighted there for you, the Remsen advisory in 2021, that's really an update of another advisory in the same topic, ransomware, that was published by FinCEN in October 2021. The first one and the one in October 21, you should refer to that one too, because it pretty much provided information on the role of the financial intermediaries on processing ransomware payments. It provides some trends, the initial trends on these whole cybercrime issues, typologies that you could use to train your personnel and so on. And it also provided some key red flags in a lot more red flags than the ones that I'm covering over here. So financial institutions could be prepared. But more importantly, it gave some tips about how to report these and even using some of the tools out there to share some of the information with other organizations. I put here the cybercrime on COVID-19, although we're not in COVID. It's good to know and understand how these TCOs and how these organizations could operate remotely as well, and how could they take advantage of these. And a lot of these cyber crimes really started during the times of COVID because everybody was working remotely and nobody had control. So a lot of information was flowing from your house to your company, and people didn't have VPNs, people didn't have any type of security measures. So criminals, what they did, they took advantage of all that. Another one, and the last one that I want to focus on, and please read them all. I don't want to take too much time talking about the advisory. They're very good. And what I want to highlight to you is whenever you see these advisory, don't take it like it's another instruction from FinCEN. I took it as a way, and I still take it as a way to kind of bring myself up to speed on what's happening out there. Because when I was in the side of the government, I was feeding organizations and agencies like FinCEN information about the trends, what I was seeing in my cases, the cases of my agents as it relates to financial crime. So FinCEN take that information from agencies like IRS, FBI, and others, and puts it together into these advisories to pretty much let the financial institutions know this is what's happening. Please help us identify these type of crimes, because at the end, the financial institutions are really the first line of defense in protecting our economy from bad actors. And I want to talk here lastly about the illicit fentanyl supply. As we know, FinCEN has issued a supplemental advisory. These actually came out this year in June 2024, addressing pretty much the illicit fentanyl supply chain. These advisory highlights emerging trends, and it really provides guidance to financial institutions on identifying and reporting these type of activity. The one thing I want to highlight is that initially when FinCEN put out there some other communications about this, it really talked about how the supply of the precursor chemicals was coming into the United States. So the manufacturing equipment was coming into the United States. But what happens as we learn how to detect this crime, the criminals also learns that we're detecting it, right? So what happened? There have been a little shift in the supply chain where now the TCOs, particularly those based in Mexico, are increasingly procuring fentanyl precursor chemicals and the manufacturing equipment from suppliers from the People's Republic in China, and they're actually shipping these to Mexico instead of the United States. And then I think I sent you a link of a recent DOJ press release that came up just this month in November. It was a case out of Los Angeles.
Yes.
And what's interesting, Anna, in that advisory, I'm sorry, in that press release, is when you read the article, it kind of shows you clearly how even the People's Republic of China arrested the people that were perpetrating the scheme in China. So, kudos to the US government on working, and kudos to the PRC for working with the US government in bringing these criminals into justice, right? I mean, like I always say, and in my experience working international, you cannot fight the economic crimes issues alone. It's not a fight of one agency. It's not the fight of one bank. If one bank is doing their due diligence and doing the things right, another bank is not doing it, where do you think the criminals are going to go? They're going to go to the bad bank. The same thing happens with the governments and it happens with the countries. If you have a country trying to do the right thing, they're going to go to the country where they're not doing the right thing or where there's corruption, and that's where they're going to place the funds, or that's where they're going to get the money out, or that's where they're going to integrate the funds into the economy so later on they could pass it to whatever country they want. So kudos to the agencies that work in that investigations. Kudos to the countries for actually putting it together and worked in that. I want to point out on that article that it really shows what it really has become the biggest challenge that the financial institution have these days. I don't think you're going to find one customer that is going to come to your teller and is going to tell the teller, I'm a criminal. I deal fentanyl, and here is $10,000. By the way, I'm going to put $9,000 so you don't report me. That's never going to happen. What you're going to find is you're going to find a bunch of mules. You're going to find money converted from fiat to crypto, or you're going to find mules depositing money all over the U.S. and transferring into one account, and then from that one account, they're purchasing products out of China, right? And I'm sorry about the PRC, and that's very interesting because how is the bank going to know that that chemical precursor is related to some sort of scheme, right? Well, you got to know your customer. You got to know your transaction. It comes down to that. And that's what the government is going to the bank and saying, look out for transactions that involve manufacturing equipment and precursor chemical. The new typologies and the red flags that were highlighted in this document introduce pretty much updated typologies and assist financial institutions in detecting those transactions. And again, it's very hard because what you need to be looking for is unusual payments to chemical companies, purchase of laboratory equipment that is
Mhm.
really inconsistent with the customer profile, and transactions that are involved in high risk jurisdictions. The red flags that I want to highlight, and this I got two more slides to go through here. The typologies are pretty much, like I mentioned before, look for chemical company transactions, look for purchases of laboratory equipment, look out for high risk jurisdictions. More important, look at the FinCEN reports, look at the cases that are being taken out, right? This case was taken down in LA. So if you're a financial institution operating in Los Angeles, read that press release, read that indictment, read the typologies, and look for companies that are doing the same that are your customers, or look for individuals that are perpetrating the same type of scheme. And before the government comes to you with a subpoena, just react to it and establish proper measures to try to identify it. And I get it, it's hard because it's really detecting the crime related to fentanyl based on purchases of equipment and so on. But again, it goes back to the principles of anti-money laundering, which is know your customer, know your transaction, and investigate further. They're also using structuring and ledgering that I mentioned, rapid moving of funds, and the use of a shell company. And lastly, when you look at the red flags on this document, I want to point out, and you see it there in red on my screen, FinCEN has put a key term as well for fentanyl. Very important that you put that on your SARs, on your STRs when you file them. If you were in the foreign countries, very important that you report it and make reference to some fentanyl related scheme. And, obviously, when you're at a bank level, and I'll tell you as an investigator, I don't expect you as a bank to know the crime, right? To actually have an evidence piece in your that is gonna crack my case. Well, I actually have or could tell you that information that has been provided by banks and SARS has revealed a lead to me as an investigator that when put together with a testimony of a person, I was able to prosecute someone. So you may think that you don't know at all at the bank and you're only seeing a little piece of everything, but that little piece, when you give it to the government on a suspicious activity report, particularly in crimes like fentanyl, it's going to be important. And it's going to help the government put the case together, put the pieces together. And these days, with, like I said before, artificial intelligence and other automated computer systems, the government could a lot easier be able to connect the dots between different states in the United States or even countries globally. So that's it for me. In terms of the presentation, I'm going to stop sharing. But I don't know if they have any questions.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much, Willie. I didn't even want to interrupt. I've actually answered a few questions that came in, but I left one here because even though I answered a little bit, Laura Cruz, who's joined us today, had a question. She says, based on your experience, how far should we, compliance, go to validate source of funds, SOF, when we are talking about crypto wallets, etc.? I'd say, you have to validate as just any other third party or any other third party, meaning a client, a vendor, or whatever. And you're not really, what you're doing, and that's something that you brought up earlier in your slide number 13, which is extremely important, is one of the things that the AML Act says is that we need to have more useful, and that's the aim of the act, is to have more useful suspicious activity reports. And Willie, you brought it on and you said you need to add more information that will help law enforcement to find this information. So back to your question, Laura, is how far does compliance have to go to validate source of funds? When you have a client, like in the case that Willie was presenting on the ransomware, it's only $9,500 in Bitcoin. So when you have someone that has never sent money to an exchanger, immediately that should be a red flag to question. That doesn't mean that there's anything. I may, for the first time, want to dabble into Bitcoin and I'm buying Bitcoin, right? But the amounts are interesting. So for the first time that I'm going to buy Bitcoin, why would I buy $9,500? So creating certain rules, or if your systems are smart enough to be able to, come up with things of this nature, but you would need to do have the knowledge of source of funds for any type of customer, regardless of whether they are, buying Bitcoin or selling Bitcoin. At some point, you will see the sale of the Bitcoin come to you into fiat from an exchanger, right? Does that make sense for your client? Or are you seeing that all of the money that is coming in from a client of yours is coming always from exchangers? So if that's the case, you need to know where that money, where that money is coming from. Are they themselves an exchanger? What kind of business they're in? If most of the source of where the money is coming from is from exchangers. So Willie, do you have anything else to say about that in particular?
Yeah, that's actually a very good point, Anna, and you hit it right now, specifically in the right answer. What I would add to what you say is that in order for you to be exchanging fiat, which is US dollars or Colombian pesos or Mexican pesos, into cryptocurrency, right? You got to have a license in the United States, right? You got to be registered as a money service business, a money transmittal business, right? Just like a Western Union or any type of other business like that, because you are really exchanging fiat into currency, right? So you got to be registered with FinCEN. You got to be registered with the state, and more important, Hannah, you got to have an anti-money laundering program, right? So if you have a customer that you're seeing a lot of fiat being converted into crypto, your first trigger it should be, is this person acting as a money service business? Is this
Exactly.
person converting fiat into currency? Do they have a license? And ask those questions. That's happening a lot. And you got to be careful, right? Because there's a lot of people that are investing in crypto, right? So you could have a customer that they're doing it for themselves, right? but you could also have a customer, depending on the amount of money they're transacting, depending their profile. I would look into the customer profile. What did this customer tell me when he was coming over here he was going to do, or she was going to do? Is this customer actually converting fiat to crypto for a legitimate reason? In my tax practice, Anna, I have people that are influencers and they pay everything in crypto and they get paid in crypto. There's nothing illegal with that, right? I want to make that clear. As long as they pay the taxes, that's what they call me, right? Help them with the taxes on that, because there's absolutely nothing illegal on that. The problem is when the people are doing it to convert fiat into crypto and acting as a money service a money transmittal business, and they don't have a license, they don't have an anti-money laundering program. I have people to come into me and tell me, Willie, I'm doing this. And my first response to them is, you need to go find an attorney. You need to bring your business into place and tell your attorney to hire me, and I'll help you put that AML program together, or they could call you, Anna, and put that anti-money laundering program to ready. Because you know what happens? The bank or that financial institution that is receiving the source of the funds, they don't know where that money's coming from, right? And like in my previous job, it could be an undercover operation from IRS. It could be an undercover operation from DEA, and it could be the government transacting with the criminals, and we using your financial institution and you don't know it, right? So eventually we're going to come to you as criminal investigators, going to say, hello, where is your AML? Are you capturing these type of transactions? So I think that's what you got to think. Always think ahead. Always ask the right questions to your customers. Always, again, going back, Anna, to the principles, know your customer, know your transaction. I think that's the key. Every case is different, but for the most part, you got to watch out in those type of transactions. Am I dealing with a customer that is acting as a money service business / money transmitter?
Yeah. And we do have, I've answered most of the questions. We did have another question that came in from Daniel Chaustre. And he was basically, he says, the links between Mexican drug cartels, Chinese mafias, and banks for money laundering are well known. Are American banks applying any special due diligence for Chinese citizens? And my answer is no, because it's got to be risk-based, and there's a bunch of other variables. Not just because you are Chinese, you're going to get a different type of due diligence than if you are from another jurisdiction. But definitely, you would want to have, based on the fact that your client, what economic activity is that client in? Is that client from China or from a country where there's like a lot of activity, a criminal activity or transnational organizations coming in and out of that type of jurisdiction. So those are things that you would take into consideration, because otherwise, would be profiling by jurisdiction only, and that would not be adequate. So, but definitely putting into your customer risk rating and transaction monitoring systems, those jurisdictions that are heightened risk right now for especially, like the fentanyl and all these type of criminal activity. We've super ran out of time, but I see that a lot of you are still there. If there's any other questions, feel free to send them to us via email. I think Celeste had a couple of last-minute words to close our webinar today.
Well,
the only thing. Thank you. Yes, thank you so much.
That's what I was going to do.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you found this. I sure did. Very, very interesting presentation. Thank you, Ana Maria, for moderating and helping us, and Willie, priceless presentation. Thank you so much. And everyone, stay tuned for more webinars from RiskRadar.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.